Your Ford engine is being destroyed from the inside right now, and there is a good chance you are the one doing it. I am not talking about neglecting oil changes or running bad fuel. I am talking about coolant mistakes that are quietly cracking engine blocks, corroding water pumps, and turning a $40,000 truck into a $6,000 repair bill. I have been wrenching on Fords for over 15 years, and I have seen every one of these mistakes walk through the shop door. The scary part is most of the owners who made them had no idea anything was wrong until the damage was already done. Today we are covering 7 coolant mistakes that are killing Ford engines across the country. Mistake number 4 is one of the most common things I see in the shop, and it causes a type of internal corrosion so severe it looks like someone poured gravel into the cooling system. Mistake number 1 is something Ford owners do deliberately, thinking they are being responsible, but it is actually one of the fastest ways to destroy a Ford engine block. Stay with me through all 7 because any one of these mistakes on its own can cost you thousands of dollars, and several of them together can turn your engine into scrap metal. Let's start with mistake number 7. This one trips up a lot of well-meaning owners. Topping off your coolant with plain tap water. When your coolant level drops and you're in a hurry, it's tempting to grab a jug from the kitchen or the garden hose and fill it up. It's water. It cools things down. What's the problem? The problem is enormous. Tap water is loaded with minerals, specifically calcium, magnesium, and chlorine. When that water circulates through your engine and gets hot, those minerals do not evaporate. They come out of solution and deposit themselves on every internal surface they touch. The technical term is scale buildup, and it acts like an insulating blanket on the inside of your coolant passages. That insulation stops your engine from transferring heat into the coolant the way it's supposed to. The engine can run hotter than the gauge shows because the gauge measures coolant temperature, not the actual temperature of your cylinder walls and head gaskets. Over time, scale buildup can reduce the internal diameter of small coolant passages by a meaningful amount, restricting flow and creating hot spots. Hot spots in the cylinder head are where head gasket failures begin. Hot spots in the engine block are where cracks start. I've pulled thermostats from Ford engines that had so much scale coating them that the thermostat could not fully open, and the owner had no idea because the temperature gauge looked normal. The chlorine in tap water is even more dangerous because it accelerates corrosion inside aluminum components. Ford has used aluminum engine blocks and cylinder heads for decades. The 3.5-liter EcoBoost, the 5-liter Coyote, and the 2.7-liter EcoBoost all have aluminum parts that chlorine attacks. Even a few top-offs with tap water over the life of the vehicle can trigger corrosion inside the water pump housing, the thermostat housing, and the coolant passage walls in the block itself. The fix is simple and cheap. Ford specifies using only distilled water, not tap water, not filtered water, not spring water. Distilled water. A gallon costs under $2 at most grocery stores and contains virtually 0 minerals or chlorine. If you top off your coolant, use distilled water. If you're doing a full coolant flush, mix your new coolant 50-50 with distilled water. This is not optional. This is the difference between a cooling system that lasts 200,000 miles and one that starts causing problems at 80,000. Mistake number 6 is one that dealerships almost never warn you about, and it is responsible for more mysterious cooling system failures than most owners would believe. Mixing coolant types. Ford has used several different coolant formulations across different model years and engine families. There was the original green silicate coolant, the yellow or orange organic acid technology coolant, the gold or orange Motorcraft Premium Gold, which is a hybrid organic acid formula specific to Ford, and the blue Motorcraft Premium coolant introduced for newer models. These are not interchangeable, and they are not compatible with each other in the way most owners assume. When you mix an organic acid technology coolant with a silicate-based coolant, You do not get a blend that works like both. You get a chemical reaction that destroys the corrosion inhibitors in both products at once. The inhibitors are the additives that protect your metal surfaces. Without working inhibitors, the coolant becomes essentially just acidic water circulating through your engine. The pH drops and aluminum components start corroding from the inside. The corrosion creates particles that circulate through the system. Those particles accelerate water pump bearing wear, clog the tiny passages in the heater core, and eventually score the surfaces inside the radiator. Ford Motorcraft Premium Gold Coolant is specifically formulated to protect the aluminum content in their modern engine families. The specific additive package it uses is incompatible with the silicate inhibitors in old-school green coolant. If someone ever did a cheap coolant flush on your Ford and grabbed whatever antifreeze was on sale, you might already have a contaminated system without knowing it. The warning signs are subtle until they are not. You might notice a slight color change in your coolant from what it should look like. You might see a sludgy or cloudy appearance in the reservoir. In severe cases, the mixture creates a gel-like consistency that coats the inside of the reservoir and restricts flow. I have opened radiator caps on Fords that had coolant that looked like chocolate milk because of contamination. The right move when buying any Ford is to verify what coolant is already in the system. If you do not know the service history, do a complete flush and refill with the correct Motorcraft coolant for your specific model and year. Ford's owner manual specifies exactly which coolant your engine requires. Spending $15 to $25 on the right product is nothing compared to a $1,200 water pump replacement or a $4,000 head gasket job caused by running the wrong coolant chemistry for years. If you are getting value out of this video, hit the like button and subscribe right now because we still have 5 more mistakes to cover and they get progressively worse. Mistake number 5 is one that is particularly brutal on the turbocharged EcoBoost engines, but it affects every Ford with a modern aluminum heavy drivetrain. Running coolant that is overdue for replacement. Most Ford owners know they need to change their oil. Far fewer know that coolant has a service life, and running it past that service life is actively damaging the engine. Here is what happens. Coolant starts its life with a carefully balanced package of corrosion inhibitors, anti-foaming agents, and pH stabilizers. Those additives are what make coolant protective. The antifreeze component, ethylene glycol, does not really wear out, but the additive package absolutely does. Heat, oxygen exposure, and normal circulation degrade the inhibitors over thousands of miles of driving. Ford specifies that Motorcraft Premium Gold coolant should be replaced at 100,000 miles or 10 years for the initial fill, and every 50,000 miles or every 5 years after that. Many owners either do not know this schedule or ignore it entirely. When the inhibitors are depleted, the pH of the coolant drops. Coolant that started near neutral or slightly alkaline becomes increasingly acidic. Acid and aluminum are not friends. The acid attacks the soft aluminum in your water pump housing, your thermostat housing, your intake manifold coolant passages, and the aluminum sections of your engine block. The corrosion happens slowly and invisibly, but after 2 or 3 years of running depleted coolant, the damage is real and cumulative. For EcoBoost engines, the turbocharger is cooled by the engine coolant in addition to the engine oil. The small coolant passages that run through the turbo pedestal are particularly vulnerable to corrosion when the inhibitors are gone. I have seen turbo coolant lines develop pinhole leaks from the inside out because the owner ran degraded coolant for 150,000 miles without a change. Testing your coolant costs almost nothing. Ford dealers sell coolant test strips, and most auto parts stores carry them. You dip a strip in your coolant reservoir and compare the color to the chart. It tells you the pH level and gives you a rough idea of inhibitor depletion. If the pH is low or the strip indicates depleted inhibitors, you need a flush regardless of mileage or age. Heat cycles, short trips, and turbo vehicles deplete coolant inhibitors faster than the standard schedule assumes. Do not just drain and fill either. A proper coolant flush removes the old, contaminated fluid from the heater core the block passages, the cylinder head passages, and the overflow reservoir. Simply draining the radiator leaves a significant volume of old coolant in the system, which contaminates the fresh coolant you just added. A proper flush means flushing with distilled water until the water running out is clear, then refilling with fresh coolant correctly mixed. Mistake number 4 is one of the most destructive things I encounter in the shop. It happens because of a genuine misunderstanding about how cooling systems work, using straight antifreeze without diluting it. This might surprise you. A 50-50 mix of antifreeze and distilled water actually provides better heat transfer than straight antifreeze. Pure ethylene glycol undiluted has a lower heat capacity than water. Water transfers heat more efficiently than glycol. When you run straight antifreeze, you are sacrificing the cooling efficiency of the mixture. The engine runs slightly hotter than it would on a properly diluted mix, not dramatically hotter, but consistently hotter over time. That consistent additional heat accelerates all the wear mechanisms we have already talked about. But the real damage from straight antifreeze happens deep inside the engine, where you cannot see it and cannot measure it without pulling the engine apart. Undiluted antifreeze has a much higher concentration of silicates and other additives. When those concentrated additives contact hot metal surfaces repeatedly, they precipitate out of solution faster than they would in a diluted mixture. The precipitation creates deposits inside the narrow coolant passages in the cylinder head and engine block. Those deposits look and feel like coarse sand or grit. They are abrasive. As they circulate, they erode the sealing surfaces inside the water pump. They score the face of the thermostat. They clog the tiny internal passages in the heater core. I have pulled water pumps off Fords that looked like someone had used them as a sandblasting cabinet on the inside. The impeller blades were pitted and corroded from circulating gritty, over-concentrated coolant for years. Straight antifreeze also has a higher freeze point than a 50-50 mix, which might sound counterintuitive. Pure ethylene glycol freezes at around -9 degrees Fahrenheit. A 50-50 mix of antifreeze and water freezes at around -34 degrees Fahrenheit. So filling up with straight antifreeze, thinking you are being extra protective, actually gives you less freeze protection than the diluted mixture. Ford recommends a maximum concentration of 70% antifreeze to 30% distilled water for extreme cold climates and a standard 50-50 mix for most driving conditions. Go beyond 70% antifreeze and you start losing both freeze protection and heat transfer efficiency simultaneously. Buy pre-mixed 50-50 coolant if you want to make it simple. Ford offers Motorcraft coolant in both concentrated and pre-mixed versions. Pre-mixed is already combined with distilled water at the correct ratio. Open it and pour it in. No measuring, no mistakes. Before we get to the top 3 mistakes, if you have not subscribed yet, subscribe now and hit the bell icon. These videos come out regularly and you do not want to miss what is next, because the next 3 mistakes cause catastrophic engine failures, not just gradual wear. Mistake number 3 is something that happens in the driveway of well-intentioned owners who just want to make sure their engine is okay. It is opening the coolant reservoir or radiator cap when the engine is hot. I know it sounds obvious, but I need to explain why this is so dangerous and how much damage it can cause. It is not just the risk of getting burned. The real story is what happens to the engine when you release the pressure. Ford cooling systems are pressurized systems. The coolant runs under pressure, typically between 13 and 18 psi, depending on the model and year. That pressure is not accidental. Pressure raises the boiling point of the coolant, which means Ford engineers can run the coolant at a higher temperature without it boiling, allowing them to extract more heat from the engine more efficiently. The system is calibrated to operate at these pressure levels with the coolant hot. When you open the cap on a hot system, you instantly drop the pressure to atmospheric. The boiling point of the coolant drops immediately. The superheated coolant that was safely below the pressurized boiling point is now above the atmospheric boiling point, and it flashes to steam instantly. Steam expands at roughly 1,700 times the volume of the liquid. That expansion is explosive
and it happens in a fraction of a second. Beyond the obvious personal safety risk, the rapid pressure drop and flash boiling inside the engine create a phenomenon called thermal shock. The sudden change in temperature and pressure affects the gasket surfaces between the cylinder head and engine block. Head gaskets on Fords, especially aluminum to aluminum interfaces, are precision components that rely on controlled, even thermal expansion. When you introduce a sudden, violent pressure drop on a hot engine, the gasket surfaces experience uneven stress. One incident might not destroy a head gasket, but repeated incidents accelerate microscopic deformation of the sealing surfaces and eventually lead to head gasket failure. The right procedure is to always let the engine cool for a minimum of 1 hour before opening the cooling system. If you absolutely must check a hot system, place a thick rag over the cap and turn it only to the first stop, not all the way off. Let the pressure bleed slowly through the rag before removing the cap fully. Most modern Fords have a translucent coolant overflow reservoir that lets you check the level without opening anything. If the level is in the correct range on the cold or hot mark on the reservoir, you do not need to open the cap at all. Mistake 2 is a mistake that compounds over time and eventually results in catastrophic cooling system failure. Ignoring small coolant leaks. Coolant leaks never stay small. That is the fundamental thing owners need to understand. A small external leak from a hose clamp or a weeping radiator seam loses coolant slowly, drops the level in the system, and eventually causes the engine to run low on coolant. But the internal damage compounds in a way that is much more serious than just losing fluid. When a Ford cooling system loses coolant, the air that fills the void is far worse than having no coolant in that space. Coolant conducts heat, air does not. AIR pockets in the cooling system create localized hotspots around the cylinder head, the intake ports, and the combustion chamber. Those hotspots accelerate carbon buildup on the valves, degrade gasket surfaces, and in severe cases, cause localized overheating that warps aluminum cylinder heads. A warped cylinder head on a Ford 5.0 Coyote or a 3.5 EcoBoost requires either precision machining to resurface it or full replacement. Head machining runs $300 to $600 per head. Head replacement with labor on a twin-turbo EcoBoost can easily exceed $4,000. Small external leaks also create a corrosion problem outside the engine. Coolant that seeps and sits on metal engine components is not benign. It is slightly acidic, especially if the inhibitors are depleted, and it promotes rust and corrosion on ferrous metal components near the leak point. Over time, leaking coolant can cause surface corrosion on cast iron components, corrode wiring harness brackets, and create a sticky residue that traps dirt and moisture. Check your coolant level every single month. It takes 30 seconds. The reservoir is visible and translucent. If the level is dropping and you are not finding any puddles under the truck, you have an internal leak, which means coolant is burning inside the combustion chamber. White smoke from the exhaust, a sweet smell from the exhaust, or a consistently dropping coolant level without visible external leaks are all signs of a head gasket failure that is already in progress. Catching it early means a $1,500 head gasket repair. Ignoring it until the engine overheats and warps the head means a $5,000 to $8,000 repair. And that brings us to mistake 1. The biggest, most expensive, most preventable coolant mistake Ford owners make. Continuing to drive when the temperature gauge is in the red or when an overheating warning appears. I understand the instinct. You are on the highway, you are late. You think maybe it will come back down. Maybe it is just a sensor. Maybe you can make it to the next exit. I have had owners look me in the eye in the shop and tell me exactly that story right before I told them their engine block was cracked and their repair bill was going to be more than the truck was worth. Here is what happens when a Ford engine overheats. The cylinder head is aluminum. The engine block may be aluminum or iron depending on the model. Aluminum expands when it gets hot. It expands at nearly twice the rate of cast iron. When you overheat an engine, the aluminum cylinder head expands faster than the iron or steel head bolts can compensate for. The head lifts off the block gasket surface by a microscopic but critical amount. The head gasket is no longer properly compressed. Coolant passages that cross the gasket surface are now exposed to combustion chamber pressure. The head gasket is compromised. Combustion gases begin entering the coolant system. Coolant begins entering the combustion chamber. The engine burns coolant, loses coolant pressure, overheats faster, and the situation cascades. If the temperature rises far enough, the aluminum cylinder head permanently distorts. It warps. It no longer sits flat on the block. No head gasket in the world will seal properly on a warped head surface. You need either machining or replacement. In severe overheating events, the aluminum of the block itself distorts, and at that point, you are looking at a replacement engine. The correct response when your temperature gauge rises into the red, or when a warning light appears, is immediate and non-negotiable. Turn off the air conditioning immediately as it puts additional load on the engine. Turn the heater to maximum heat and maximum fan, as this uses the heater core as a secondary radiator to pull heat away from the coolant. Pull over safely and shut the engine off as quickly as possible. Do not open the hood for at least 30 minutes. Do not open the coolant cap. Call for a tow. A tow costs $75 to $150. A cracked block or warped head costs $3,000 to $10,000. There is no scenario where continuing to drive an overheating Ford ends well. Zero. Every minute you keep driving and overheat is additional permanent damage to components that cannot be repaired by replacing fluid or gaskets. Ford's temperature gauge is intentionally dampened. It moves slowly to avoid alarming drivers over normal variation. When that needle gets into the red zone, the actual coolant temperature has already been critically high for a period of time before the gauge caught up. The situation is always worse than the gauge makes it look. These 7 mistakes span everything from a $2 jug of distilled water to a $10,000 engine replacement, and the difference between them is knowledge. Owners who take care of their cooling systems, use the right coolant, change it on schedule, never mix types, use the correct dilution, check for leaks regularly, and pull over the instant an overheat warning appears. Those owners are still driving their Fords at 200,000 and 250,000 miles with the original engine. Go check your coolant level this week. Check the color, check the condition. If it is dark, if it is murky, or if you do not know when it was last serviced, schedule a flush. It costs $100 to $150 at most shops, and it is the single most cost-effective preventive maintenance you can do for a Ford with an aluminum engine. If you found this useful, make sure you subscribe, hit the notification bell, and drop a comment telling me which of these mistakes you have been guilty of. Share this with any Ford owner you know, because most of them have no idea their cooling system is working against them right now. I will see you in the next one.